Welcome back to Researchers on a Mission Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and of course, my co-host, all the way from London, Johnny Webb. Of course, we have another incredible show for you today, bringing you one of my favorite ufologists, somebody who has taught me literally for the last 25 years on this subject, whose integrity is so high that he's able to gain access to so many witnesses that over the years, everything he said has pretty much been verified. And this is why I always look to this person for information. And on top of that, not only he's written a new book, he also received the British Ufologist Award for the Lifetime Achievement Award by UFO Truth magazine. Without further ado, let's bring on the one and only Timothy Good. Mr. Good, welcome to the show.
Good evening, sir.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Last time, of course, we ran out of time. I know it's going to happen again today. I can go on for weeks in a row, and we'd still run out of time. You're such an encyclopedia of information, and that's why I'm just delighted to have you, and the listeners are delighted to hear you again. I guess let's just jump into it. Your new book, Earth and Alien Enterprise. Just recently, we interviewed Paula Harris, and Paula Harris on another show, she said 2 books that she would recommend for all those people out there who are interested in ufology and want to learn. One of the books was Earth and Alien Enterprise, so she truly holds you in high revere. And I have to agree with her fully, because that book covers everything, going back to some of the first case of missing time, to one of the earliest landings that was documented, going back to the 30s, pre-World War II, everything that goes against what the debunkers are saying. Let's just start with the Dworshak case, 1932. Can you tell us how you came about that case and a little bit about it?
Well, I was told about it by a friend, and I thought I really need to meet this guy. So I made a special trip to Montana, I believe it was, and I was able to interview him at great length. And I learned a great deal from him. I found him very, very convincing indeed. He has a very interesting background, I believe, in naval intelligence. He was, I think, on more than a nodding acquaintance with one of the American presidents, George Bush. According to my information, I have a copy of a letter from Bush to Leo, which is quite revealing in a way.
I'm assuming you're referring to Bush Sr., right? George Herbert Walker Bush?
Yes.
I have always thought he's in the know for several reasons. One, being the director of the CIA from, I think, 78 to 79. And, of course, just being privy to all sorts of information, of course, being vice president and then becoming president. Why do you think what was the connection between him and Leo Dworshak? Why did he send them that letter? Do you know why?
I honestly don't know. Just that Dworshak had some very, very good connections, and he didn't discuss all of them. He obviously had, I would say, some very high security clearances.
Well, you brought up two good talking points, right, just based on the statement. One, presidents, and another, government connections. Let's go back to the 50s. George Adamski. A lot of people are either with him or against him, in the sense that some people don't believe him, other people saying this is for one of the first earliest contact cases where we were being warned about destruction on Earth, that we're going to destroy ourselves, and so on and so forth. This man, despite what anybody will say out there, had an ordnance card, something that is...
A United States government ordnance department card, which gave him access to all military bases throughout the world, not just the United States, which I think says a lot. And that in itself, I think, is very significant.
I would agree so. As a matter of fact, he also met with Pope John Paul this, or was it John Paul the First or Second? I don't know.
I'm not quite sure which, but he had private meetings, classified meetings, with 2 popes. That's for sure. And I have named them in my book. I can't mention, off the record. I can't recall absolutely everything, but there were 2 meetings with popes, and perhaps even 3. over the years.
Well, despite what people say, this is proof by him having a United States government department ordnance card that allowed ordnance department that allowed him access to bases around the world. He had meetings with, I'm assuming, with presidents, and
he did. A friend of mine was with George Adamski, a lady called Madeleine Rodefer, and she saw him enter the White House through a special door. You don't just walk into the White House, and she witnessed Adamski going in for a meeting with whichever the president was at that time.
And based on all the information we have about George Adamski, clearly the reason why he would have such access is because of his connections to these extraterrestrials that were visiting him. If he didn't have it, then they would have never given it to him. So the debunkers out there who are trying to say that there was nothing to that case are absolutely wrong if they're not looking at all the evidence. Now, we're talking about presidents. Let's go talk about two in particular that I wanted to ask you. First, Kennedy and Eisenhower. Maybe we should start with the older one first, Eisenhower. These days, versus 30 years ago, more and more information has been coming forward about him meeting with the ETs. And you even write in your book there was a point where he disappeared for 36 hours, said he had a cold, yet some witnesses showed or was there at Holloman Air Force Base for a prearranged meeting with extraterrestrials.
That's right. I mean, Eisenhower, there's a famous press conference in Washington, D.C. on February the 9th, 1955, announcing his trip the next day to Georgia for a few days quail hunting, in quotes. And on February the 11th, 2 days later, it was reported that the president had come down with a cold. And he was not seen again for 36 hours, having secretly been flown in Air Force One to Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. And in fact, that happened on 2 occasions at Holloman Air Force Base in 1955. And my understanding, in my book, I've named witnesses who actually saw this craft come in and leave. Air Force One was parked in a certain area of Holloman Air Force Base at the time, and this craft came down and landed near Air Force One, Eisenhower's own plane. This was a Constellation aircraft. And apparently he went on board the UFO for half an hour, for 30 minutes, but nothing has ever been revealed about what exactly was discussed, which is a shame, but a lot of additional information has come to light over the years.
Some people suggest the meeting was for a treaty or an agreement that we would stop nuclear weapons or testing them, making them in exchange for technology. Do you know anything about that, or is that just...
I don't know for sure, John, but it makes absolute sense. I think you've hit the nail on the head.
I would agree so. And one thing that always caught my attention, 1961, January, when he was leaving office and he made his speech for outgoing the office of the presidency, he warned us, beware of the military-industrial complex. Now, the way I took it, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that he was in the loop after Truman gave him the briefing documents. He met with these ETs. He probably did a whole lot more with the technology, but I was under the impression that the reason he warned us of the military-industrial complex is because he was shut out. Do you think that's possibly the case?
I think it's possible. I don't know for sure, but what I do know for sure is that Eisenhower had several meetings with extraterrestrials which were witnessed by dozens of people. There was one in Los Angeles. There was another one at Holloman, probably 2 at Holloman. And I think in total there were probably about 4 or 5 or even 6 meetings that were arranged at United States Air Force bases with President Eisenhower. Meeting together with the aliens.
You're absolutely right with being a California resident myself. I remember being almost 30 years ago, first hearing, and of course, as the years progressed and more people wrote about it, one of the meetings, other than Holloman, just like you said, in California, was at then Muroc Airfield, now known as Edwards. Do you think it was different species, different types of ETs he was meeting, or was they possibly, I mean, again, this is speculation, or were they meeting to follow up on the last agreement for maybe more technology for us and maybe for them to kind of put us in our place for using nuclear weapons?
Well, all I know is that I think the meeting in 1954 at what I believe is Edwards Air Force Base, it was actually arranged, and the aliens landed several craft, and Eisenhower was there with quite a number of his officials, and he was quite shocked by the whole thing. I mean, the aliens said they didn't want to. In the end, they said they didn't want to cause too much trouble. They appreciated that this would cause a lot of shock on Earth if they were to actually show themselves to the whole planet, and they agreed with what Eisenhower thought about that. But so that was quite something, I think.
Well, now. It's established through several sources, several witnesses, that Eisenhower clearly was not quail hunting,
No.
Exactly. Or in the case of the Edwards, what happened is apparently he claimed to have an emergency dentist.
Yes.
But at the same time, when the wife of the dentist was interviewed, she says she specifically remembers her husband being Eisenhower's dentist, but yet she has no recollection whatsoever of him meeting, the dentist and the president meeting during those days, meaning that she's implying that it was purely fabricated, which goes to show again that he was just covering it up. Now, speaking on presidents, right after Eisenhower made the outgoing speech warning us to the military-industrial complex, he went right into the fact that Kennedy became president. Do you know of any meetings between Kennedy and these extraterrestrials, or was he briefed to the same level?
My understanding is that George Adamski arranged a meeting for Kennedy with some of the alleged space people, and he was taken on board one of the large cigar-shaped craft for quite some time. That is my understanding, and Adamski arranged that for him. As we discussed earlier, Adamski had a United States government ordnance card. He was in a very good position to make such an arrangement.
And again, now this is pure speculation. Some people have claimed that one of the reasons Kennedy was assassinated, which 90% of the American public does not believe the original story that Oswald was the lone gunman, and even a higher percentage of the world doesn't believe it. Do you think...
I think there were quite a few gunmen around. I mean, you've got the grassy knoll for starters.
Yes.
I mean, that was, I think they were involved. And, I mean, it just wasn't the single shooter, that's for sure.
You're absolutely right. And if you look...
I have to say that it wasn't just the alien situation, but Kennedy was very unpopular with all sorts of people, and there were all sorts of plans to have him put away with. So, there were lots of candidates for the assassination, put it that way.
Yeah, like you said, one of the reasons he was unpopular, especially with the military-industrial complex, is because of the fact that he gave a speech not too long before he was assassinated, basically telling the governments of the world to not only stop nuclear weapons, the Soviet Union at the time, but to basically disarm themselves completely, end the armies and end wars. And so that obviously doesn't sit well with a military defense contractor. Now, this goes to my next question. I've been worried that the reason why we're not seeing as much government openness or through Freedom of Information Acts here in the United States giving us actual evidence is the reason that I think is possibly because the artifacts and the crashed flying saucers or crash retrievals, all those are no longer in the government hands, but possibly in private corporations that don't have to answer to the people. Do you think that's a plausible theory?
I do, and I also think that our own people have been given some of these craft. Gordon Cooper, who I never met, unfortunately, but I corresponded with him, and I think I spoke with him on the phone once, revealed that he was actually flying these craft. And he said, I don't know what it takes, because he was so frustrated at one of the early United Nations meetings, dismissing the subject, that he said, what does it take? Do I have to fly one of these craft and land it so that everyone can see in New York and in front of the United Nations. He actually threatened to do that because he had access. And I can tell you that many of the United States astronauts, and perhaps other ones, Soviet, whatever, I don't know, have been flying craft which we have either been given or we have adapted or improved from recovered alien vehicles. But I can tell you for a fact that quite a number of the astronauts have been flying saucers. And in fact, 3 or 4 years ago, I spent quite some time together with my girlfriend in Italy with Stefano Breccia, a great man who was involved in the so-called Amicizia case. And he had actually been in some of these craft, and he had lots of contacts. And there's just no question that these things are very real. And one thing he told me, which I was fascinated by, was that 10 Italian Italian Navy pilots had been flying some of these craft. So quite clearly, we have been given access to these craft, and they're being flown by our people as well as by so-called aliens.
Now, one can assume that if the Italian government has trained people to fly these, that other governments, such as the UK, the US, and maybe Brazil, I don't know who else, but other governments have these same craft.
Sure.
So I really wish Gordon Cooper followed up with his threat, because that would have really raised some eyebrows and ended a lot of the speculation with these debunkers that are always trying to throw a wedge in these facts. Along with a couple more presidents real quick. Well, actually, since we're on Gordon Cooper, let me ask you an astronaut question. In your book, you mentioned that Neil Armstrong, not Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong said that the CIA had him cover up basically what he saw on the moon, which was giant ships that were menacing, to be his exact words.
Absolutely, yes. This information was passed to a friend of mine, Pamela Hanford, who had been in MI6. And she found herself, she was at, I would think, a very restricted NASA conference in Italy in 1984. And she gave a short presentation there. She had been with MI6 for considerable time at that stage. And she told me that her room was actually right next to that of both of those astronauts.
Neil Armstrong.
Of the main astronaut, Neil Armstrong and Buzz, and therefore she was able to converse with them, and they confirmed a lot of things to her. And that was back in May of 1984 at this restricted conference. I knew that lady, and she was very, very credible.
Exactly, and you even talk about, like I said, you mentioned in this book, you mentioned this yourself, she was MI6. That's an intelligence agency. Someone like that.
Well, that's the equivalent of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yeah.
Our equivalent of, yeah.
Exactly. So someone coming from there obviously has the intelligence to get to join that organization, to be recruited, and not to mention the contacts to get to speak to people in high levels, and would possibly be privy to some information such as extraterrestrials. So coming from an MI6 agent versus some random stranger who sat next door, it gives that much more credibility. Now, Now, going back again to the astronauts, I do know that during the space shuttle missions, there were several sightings, and they even started creating code words such as Santa Claus 1.
That's correct, absolutely correct.
Do you know of other astronauts prior to the space shuttle missions that encountered them, that were going to the moon, maybe in Apollo missions, Apollo 14 or 12? Do you know anything about, did anyone else encounter it? Because it was always my impression that one way or another they were always seeing something in space.
Quite a number of the astronauts had close encounters with craft. There's no question about that at all.
Now,
it's interesting that one in June, I think it was in 1984, when this friend of mine, Pamela Hanford, who had been with, the long expression is Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, and she was participating in this NASA conference at Anacapri in Italy. She learnt from Neil Armstrong that when he and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon in July 1969, they encountered large alien spacecraft which they found menacing. And that's a sort of rumor that goes around, but coming as it does from Pamela Hanford, who I would, she was a very, very credible lady, very well connected. I think that's absolutely the case, and that's why they didn't. Well, allegedly they didn't. They never went back to the moon. Really. I do not know if that's true, John, but it's possible.
It does make sense. If we were warned off the moon, and obviously our technology has only gotten better since the early 70s, why wouldn't we have gone back? So to me, I just was always assumed that we went there, something happened, we were told not.
There were others there.
Yes, the others there that were there long before us, and we're told that this is sort of ours. Back to the presidents. Near the end of your book, it's only a short reference, but it goes back to even George Washington possibly having contact. Do you know? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Or
oh gosh, I wish I could, but I can't. I can't remember the whole event. But I mean, it goes back. It certainly goes back several hundred years, according to what I've published. But I can't remember it word for word exactly what happened. But that is the story at any rate, that there were contacts with George Washington in decades ago.
So two centuries plus ago, actually.
Yes.
Well, it's another president, I guess. We mentioned George Bush. We mentioned Kennedy. We mentioned Eisenhower. Let's talk about Nixon for a second. He was Eisenhower's vice president. He ran against Kennedy, lost, and then sure enough, 8 years after that, he ran and he won. I always thought that he had more information than Johnson or any subsequent presidents just because of the fact that he was privy to all the information that Eisenhower knew. And my impression is because they only serve 4 years, and if they're elected to a second term, 8 years, they don't get as much information as someone who's for life in the CIA or NSA. Do you think that he had, because obviously the story of him and showing Jackie Gleason and the crash disk. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that's right. And I mean, she confirmed that her husband had returned from the trip visibly shaken by the experience. Beverly McKittrick, Gleason's wife, confirmed that her husband had returned really shaken by the whole thing.
Now.
And that was in 1973 when Gleason was taken by Nixon to this top secret repository at Homestead Air Force Base, Florida.
And he was known to shake his Secret Service tail, so this just fits perfectly with what I mean. It's fact that he shook his Secret Service tails often, and to get off his back that particular day to show his good friend Jackie proof again just. Everything fits in line. It's not as if it's records show that he's in another country and yet the story emerges. It just, again, fits perfectly with what's happened. Now, I'm going to change gears a little bit. A lot of talk lately, I don't know if you've heard about this, but right here, California, in Malibu, Google Maps, using their, of course, satellites, showed this to the public. Somebody just digging around found right off the coast of Malibu, underwater, this giant structure with these pillars that I think are about 600 feet tall, and they're equally spaced. And this is, I think it's 1.5 miles wide, humongous.
Yes, I've seen pictures of that. I don't know if the pictures are genuine. I'm sure they are, but they do appear to show extraordinary developments, don't they, underwater?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I think they're credible is because they didn't surface from just some regular person who put them on the internet and had photoshopped them. These are official Google Maps. Anybody right there, right now, listening can go onto Google Maps and just zoom in on the coast of Malibu, and you will see these for yourself. Do you think that this was an extraterrestrial base? Because that's the next subject I'm going to get to is underground. Or do you think it's a United States military base, or maybe a joint?
It could be both.
Yes.
As you've just come out, I think more likely that. I think more likely a joint base.
Do you know of any other joint bases across the world?
No, not offhand. But all I know is that there are many undersea and underground bases around the world. And there have been for a very long time.
And that was going to be my next set of topics. Last time we spoke, we briefly touched on, because we ran out of time, was the underground bases of these various factions of extraterrestrials, and some of them warring with each other, and yet they're living on the same planet, just in different parts. And as I think you mentioned last time, some of these bases are several miles wide or long.
Huge. I mean, in the Amicizia case in Italy, this was like in the 1970s and 80s and everything. There were huge underground bases. I mean, they were vast, and the aliens were able to create these things in seconds. They were able to, they had the technology to cause the to produce a whole huge area where they could live and their craft and so on and so forth. And then when they left, they could close down the whole thing, within minutes, if not seconds. They had this technology to produce these bases, and in some cases they were able to produce very small bases. In towns and cities, so that they were more able to communicate with some of the people that they were dealing with at that time.
Now, again, this is a huge development. The fact that there's humongous bases that they can build with their technology in an extremely fast amount of time versus what it would take us to construct any base.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's different factions, so it's not necessarily the same.
Yes, absolutely, and there've been terrible battles, if we're to believe a lot of the information. But I believe some of it because I knew Stefano Breccia, and he was a very, very well genned up gentleman, and I had the greatest respect for him. And he said there were definitely dreadful things going on, with some of the aliens that were very, very peculiar, and there was a battle going on half the time.
And exactly
between aliens.
Yes, that's what we mentioned last time, that these different factions were fighting each other, possibly for control of us, possibly for control of the minerals. And wasn't there something about 100-year war or something that started in the 40s, or am I mixing two subjects?
That you're getting slightly mixed up, but you're absolutely correct. My understanding is that if I can find the element here, let's have a look. I can't find the information.
That's okay.
Just offhand, but
that's no problem. But obviously there's a war going on between different factions of extraterrestrials.
Yes.
And then there was 100-year, maybe it wasn't a war, maybe 100-year plan to desensitize us and acclimate us. And
well, that exactly. That's. I'm glad. Yes, we need to address that. I'm just finding the exact place here. I think it's at the beginning of the final chapter, if I recall correctly.
But nonetheless, that would make perfect sense of trying
Yes, I've got it here. I do have it here, John. It was acquired quite a number of years ago, but this is what I was told by a United States government informant. I would never give his name at all, but my information is that there is in fact an alien presence on this Earth, and there is a hybridization program. And what I have been told by several people is that these creatures have a long-term plan to create a race of alien-human hybrids, purportedly to make us more peaceful. But in fact, their true purpose is to create a passive human race incapable of violence by eradicating the human emotions that enable us to survive, thus laying us open to conquest. I'm just quoting from my book here because I think it's quite important. But as I've said, if this has been a long-term stratagem, I've yet to see much evidence of the human race becoming less violent. in any event, what I've been told is these particular aliens are not omnipotent, and to a certain extent they feared us. And I was also told that a number of their bases were guarded by elements of the United States military. And it was all compartmentalized under Project Aquarius. For example, there was a select cell within the Army which worked with other security cells in Air Force and Navy. And around 100 personnel from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, that's AFOSI, which actually deal specifically with the alien situation, were involved. And in 1998, I was invited to the Defense Airborne Reconnaissance Office in the Pentagon by General Kenneth Israel. And I was there for half an hour. There were several other people there. And he confirmed for me that AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, was definitely sort of the main investigative group, since what he said to me was that the phenomenon seemed to be more of a policing problem rather than one affecting national security. But I was given a lot of information, and some of it's quite alarming. As you're probably aware, all sorts of problems have arisen. But in any event, we have a lot of information, thank heavens, that's been acquired by various researchers over the years.
Exactly, especially such as yourself, who has such high contacts with people. And again, everything I've read over the last 2.5 decades of yours has been proven by other sources. Either, I don't know if they were following your work and then just did their own investigation, but pretty much everything you've said that I've read has been confirmed, and things that haven't yet are going to be, in my mind, because you've never been wrong on anything, and that's why I always love talking to you.
I wouldn't go that far.
To me, I haven't seen anything from everything I've read, and I think last time I told you this, even your book, Above Top Secret, was the sole reason Captain Robert Salas went ahead to talk about the Maelstrom Air Force Base incident. Although he got confused, the one you wrote about happened a week before, and he just assumed that was his, but he didn't realize that there were multiple of these nuclear shutdowns. Now, let me go back to what you mentioned. Yes, AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special
Investigations.
Yes,
yeah.
They're, like you said, at the top of the ladder. I've also heard that the Navy has their Office of Special Investigations.
I'm sure.
And they too, I don't know if they share information or not, but of course AFOSI is on top. Now, Bud Hopkins, before he passed away, and the people who have continued his work and who have been working alongside him for years, Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb, Dr. Jacobs, Kathleen Martin, what they've told me basically was that initially when people, women and men were being abducted and sperm and ova taken, these hybrids were basically being made inside the woman and then taken out prematurely, grown on the ship. They were told they were shown these babies that looked more alien than human, and were told to love them and do certain things. That progressed over time to where they started looking more and more human, to the point where they looked so human that recently, the last 15 years or so, maybe give or take, plus or minus 5 years, instead of being, say, shown them and love them and we're observing, they're actually being shown human scenarios, such as a grocery store, as a what do you do in there? What do you buy? Or a door with a doorknob, what do you do with it? Or a stove in a kitchen, what's it for? And what I took away from this was that they are preparing to walk amongst us without us knowing, and basically to infiltrate us. And that's kind of what you said.
Yes.
So if that's the case, then we're obviously nearing the end game, because they're looking more and more human. And now, instead of being told the basics of the human woman to love these extraterrestrials or love these hybrids while they're being observed, they're actually being told to show them how to be human. Now, that to me raises big concerns. Do you think that's something we should fear, or do you think the other factions that actually want these bad ETs off away from us are going to intervene. I mean, again, this is just pure speculation, but
it is just speculation. I honestly don't know. What I've learnt is that the alien species, this is described by my source about the so-called Greys, told me that they lived for several hundreds of years, and anatomically they were different. They had a bi-chambered heart, and a single lung served to oxygenate their blood and tissues and to eliminate bodily wastes in gaseous form. Vegetable-based food was liquefied and nutrients absorbed through their tissues, not gastronomically. And apparently relating to the alien hybridization progress, the wombs of their females are much smaller than those of humans, thus unable to accommodate transgenic fetuses for more than 2 months. Hence, human wombs were favored. And I think this explains why, after several months, that these small critters grab what's available to them, extracted prematurely after a 2-month period, apparently.
Exactly.
So, I mean,
first trimester.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, that's very prematurely. That it would never live. They would never live if they were on Earth and they were removed from the body. A fetus that young, it's impossible. Now, again, I'm going to change gears to something that I think is huge. A lot of people have dismissed this as a joke, but when you actually watch the video, nobody's joking. President Medvedev, under Prime Minister Putin, was giving a lecture, not a lecture. He was doing an interview for a state-run television and in Russia. And the journalist, after, went ahead and asked him some questions about extraterrestrials, but he thought the microphone was off.
Absolutely correct. And Medvedev, Russian Prime Minister Medvedev, this was following a television interview in, I think, December the 7th, 2012. This journalist interviewed Medvedev, supposedly off the air. And at one point, the Prime Minister, Medvedev, was asked if the president had been handed secret files on aliens when receiving the briefcase needed to activate Russia's nuclear arsenal. Along with the briefcase with nuclear codes, responded Medvedev, apparently quite seriously, the president is given a special top-secret folder which in its entirety contains information about aliens who have visited our planet and a report of the absolutely secret special service that exercises control over aliens on the territory of our country. And finally, Medvedev says, I will not tell you how many of them are among us because it may cause panic. And that leaked out, of course, because there was a journalist who was recording his every word at that time, and I don't think he was aware that it was being recorded.
And it wasn't just audio. The video of this actually exists.
Yes, it is. I've seen it, yeah.
And I can't believe how first of all, I didn't see this reported on CNN or Fox News. I had to find this in alternative media. But even in Yahoo News, Google News, or whatever you found, those mainstream websites, they put a spin on it. Medvedev joking about aliens, or Medvedev plays a prank on the journalist, but yet you could see he's pure seriousness on his face. There's nothing in his words to indicate laughing. So to me, that's just a pure disclosure event. I don't understand how people take that and try to.
I think it was taken quite seriously by Moscow News at the time. I mean, there were a few sarcastic comments, but, the information was there. And as you say, it was videoed, and he looks very serious when he's talking about all that.
Yes, exactly. And now, that's Russia. Going to the U.S., we haven't had anything as dramatic lately. I wish we did. I really wish we did, because then people could have really pinned stuff on him. But just out of curiosity, not my curiosity, out of curiosity, Will Smith's son wanted to ask Barack Obama about aliens. And the answer that Obama gave, some people would say was joking, but at the same time, it kind of it just confirmed what he was asking. You know about that story, right?
Yes, I do, yeah.
You mind telling the listeners a little bit about it?
Well, no, I have to look up an index for that.
Well, basically, I remember he his father, Will, kept telling him, don't ask, and he kept asking his dad, Daddy, can I please ask this question? And finally, Obama says to him, you want to ask about the aliens, don't you? And he basically, Jaden Smith says yes. And he said something along the lines of that, if I was briefed about him or told about him, it would have been right in this room.
That's correct. Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and on top of that, Bill Clinton made those famous statements. I think, I don't know if it was in Berlin or where it was, where he basically said about Roswell, the Air Force is not saying anything, and I want to know too. And then not too long ago, he went on the Jimmy Kimmel show and again addressed this topic. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if he knew something or he's just really cut out of the loop and wants to know something.
I think both. Actually, he's partly cut out of the loop, but he's obviously done some homework on the subject. In my opinion.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, because in your book you write about Lawrence Rockefeller, and he was extremely interested, funded a study, and there's a very famous photo of Hillary Clinton walking with him and holding a book on aliens or UFOs. And this, to me, showed that the First Lady, the President with the remarks, the First Lady's picture, and Rockefeller being one of the most wealthiest and most influential men in the United States, if not across the globe, obviously the three of them together talking about such a subject, it was no joke.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I have Rockefeller's famous letter, Lawrence S. Rockefeller's letter from February of 1996. I think he's written to John Gibbons, PhD, assistant to the President for Science and Technology, and he says the public interest in UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence obviously remains very high, as evidenced by the recent cover story in Time magazine and the many television programs, including one this week on public television's distinguished Nova series. I sponsored this report because it seemed useful to bring together the most credible evidence about UFO sightings in the form of eyewitness reports, official statements, and scientific views. While I do not necessarily agree with every finding and conclusion, I do believe that the evidence presented indicates that this subject merits serious scientific study. Toward that end, I hope that our government, other governments, and the United Nations will cooperate in making any information they may have available.
And
that's signed by Lawrence Rockefeller.
Yet, sadly,
I would like to meet him one day.
So would I.
Can you arrange that for us?
I'll do my best. We'll have a dinner, the three of us. But obviously, for him to say that, we both know where his mind was. But sadly, ever since that statement, the governments have not shared, at least with us. Maybe they've shared amongst each other their files. But I do know some governments are moving closer to, if you want to call it disclosure, or at least opening their files.
Some of them are, definitely, yes.
Can you name a few off the top of your head that you would know?
Well, I think Russia has come out with quite a few things. As far as I recollect, they've had encounters in space, with craft from elsewhere, according to my information. Certainly, United States regularly has contacts with these things, and as for I don't know about Great Britain, but there certainly have been encounters with aircraft and so forth. In aircraft with these things, because we don't have such an elaborate space program, obviously, as the United States. So. But it is worldwide. There's no question about it, and it's well known. Most governments are well aware of what's going on, but it's just considered far too embarrassing to come out with all the facts. Particularly if people have been abducted, and there are some of the beings on this planet do not have our best interests at heart, and that's disturbing information. But the good information is that there are the goodies. There are good guys from other planets who do have our best interests at heart, and I believe have actually been on this planet for longer than we have, and we are genetically related to them.
I would agree with that too. And some other countries I know, at least I don't know the exact names of them, but in the continent, of course, here in the Americas, South America, there's some countries that are very open to this. Brazil being one of them.
You're quite right. Brazil in particular. I mean, there was an occasion when numerous Brazilian Air Force intelligence officers went into the Amazonian jungle and had their own encounters, you know, with all the witnesses there. I mean, they were all there. And all this information has been published openly. I published it in my book, and they're much more open in Brazil, in South America, in certain other parts of the planet. There are some countries and some areas wherever I've been to. For example, I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico. I think I made 7 visits there, and I only on one occasion possibly saw a UFO on the 7th, my last visit there. But the problem there is that it's a very Catholic country, and the people do not like discussing the subject. They absolutely freeze if you talk about the alien situation, because they know perfectly well it's very real, and there are abductions going on in the forested areas, all sorts of things, and they absolutely clam up, with a few exceptions. I mean, I interviewed a police officer who was woken up in the middle of the night by a strange noise. He went down into the garage, and there was this chupacabras, this bizarre-looking creature which has pervaded Puerto Rico for many years, and it was attacking his dog. So he tried to shoot at it, and he did actually fire a shot at it, and the force of the shot forced this creature back onto the policeman's car, and then it ran off at high speed, leaving huge pools of blood, which was taken away by the police and the military for investigations. And I think the actual blood was examined very, very in great detail in Mexico. That's my understanding. So we get events like that, which can be very disturbing, even to a police officer, like that particular guy who I had the pleasure of interviewing together with Graham Shepherd, who was another student of our subject, like myself.
If this happened in the United States, we clearly would not know about it. Those police officers would be quarantined, threatened. This would have been covered up so quickly. I was always hoping that a country would go rogue, such as Puerto Rico, even though they're the extreme ties with the U.S., maybe even Brazil, who really doesn't need us, in essence, doesn't need the U.S. for anything as far as oil, because they don't use it, or other reasons. Point being, I was hoping that another country would basically disclose and maybe show some of their artifacts from a crash and retrieval, and maybe even bodies, forcing the rest of the world to disclose. That's a scenario that I'm always playing in my mind and hoping will happen. I think it'll happen. I think it'll happen eventually, but when? When is the key? Me. I haven't a clue. Exactly. When is the key? We have a little under 7-8 minutes, so I'm going to get a couple more questions, and I wanted to ask you. Might as well ask you this now, since you saw something in Puerto Rico. You saw a craft, but well, I'm not sure. I mean, I've been, as I said, I was visiting there 7 times with my then girlfriend, and I never actually saw anything that I couldn't explain, except on the last occasion that I was there, and we both saw this thing. It was just a point of light in the sky, but it was zigzagging in a strange way, and then suddenly it just shot into the sea. And it's well known, this was in the, I guess, the southeast part of Puerto Rico, and I mean, we both saw it, and we both saw it shoot into the sea at phenomenal speed after this zigzagging movements above the hotel we were staying in at the time. But you know, that was the only time I saw anything peculiar in Puerto Rico, despite 7 visits. And now, that obviously is defying laws of physics. And what aircraft would fly into the water unless it had those capabilities? And according to the mainstream knowledge, we don't. But this is why UFOs are also considered USOs, because they have the capability to fly or to
unidentified submarine object. Absolutely.
Yes. So to me, they're the same thing. They're just, the moment they go underwater, they turn from a UFO to USO, but they're the same craft going to and from bases. But nonetheless, exactly, it's all the same thing. Defying laws of physics as we know them doesn't necessarily mean that because our understanding of physics doesn't understand theirs, doesn't mean that they can't, that what ours are wrong.
Exactly.
So anyhow, the points that the scientists keep making, to me, always boggle my mind. It's like, well, wait a minute. 500 years ago, you guys thought the world was flat, you know? And 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, we were told there was no such thing as planets outside of our solar system. So obviously times are changing. Now, again, before we run out of time, I wanted to get to your context. You've actually had 2 encounters, if I'm not mistaken, with human-looking extraterrestrials. Three.
The first was in 1963. I'll go through these very quickly because we're short of time.
Yes.
1963, I was touring with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and we were in California, I think on the California-Arizona border, and I saw this extraordinarily, very pretty-looking girl, quite small, waiting in line, as they say in the States, as you say in the States, and I just thought in my mind, I think you're from somewhere else, and in my mind I said, if you are actually from elsewhere, could you come by our table? Because I had 3 colleagues with me, musicians. There were 4 of us together at the table, and this girl came out of the line. She came past. She was relatively small. She came by and she did the most graceful bow to us all, a sweet smile, and then had a deadpan look, and she just walked away, and I never saw her again. And I remember the guys sitting with me saying, "Hey, where did you find her, Tim?" And I hadn't. And then the next one was in 1967, when I just, in my mind, I was in New York. We were working at Carnegie Hall, doing a lot of concerts with the London Symphony Orchestra, and I just sent out a thought. One afternoon, I sat in the lobby of what was then the Park Sheraton Hotel in New York, and I said, if any of you guys from elsewhere are around, please come and sit down beside me and prove it. And after about 35 minutes, this guy comes in, pale olive complexion, blue-green eyes, immaculately dressed, and he came and sat down beside me on a sofa, and in my mind I said, okay, if you're the guy I'm looking for, would you take your right index finger and hold it to the right side of your nose? And immediately he did that and kept it there. Now people say, well, why didn't you talk to him? Well, I hadn't requested that. And so there was absolutely no conversation, but I had the proof I needed. And my third experience, which was in 2006 in Wrocław in Poland, I was the guest of honor at what was called Professor Dudek's salon. It's a bizarre story. I'll be as quick as I possibly can. And as the guest of honor, I had given the presentation and everything. There were about 80 people there. And I had been noticing someone I was convinced was from elsewhere. They're very similar complexion to the guy I'd seen in New York, and so forth. And I sent out a few telepathic messages. There was absolutely no response whatsoever. But he happened to be the last to give a presentation to the assembled gathering. As I say, there was about 80 people there. And he gave a presentation. I don't know how many minutes it lasted. It could have probably been about 10 minutes. And it was called Earth's Future in Space. So I was all agog. And it was absolutely fascinating. So he came by me after this. He was the last person to give a presentation. And I said, I think you have a great deal of information. And I went to shake his hand. There was no shaking. I mean, he just looked at me, completely unblinking, blue-green eyes. Very cool customer. And 5 minutes later, after he'd gone, none of us there could remember what he'd actually said. So I thought, well, that's not a problem, Professor Dudek, who was running this salon and this prestigious debating society, said, oh, no. I said, oh, I'll be able to get in touch with him. I couldn't get in touch with anybody because even though there was a professional photographer was there, I couldn't get photographs. Even though it was recorded, I couldn't get any recordings. None of us could. And very, very bizarre. So and 5 minutes after my confrontation with him, which was on a very polite level, I could remember nothing myself. So that's just how frustrating this whole subject can be. But I think one day, perhaps, at least all of those present will be able to revive that thing from our brains.
That's actually what I was going to say to you is all these several contactees and abductees I've interviewed, as well as the hypnotherapists, like I said, Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb, Kathleen Martin, Dr. Jacobs, to name a few, all say that a lot of them, when they go on board, they tell the extraterrestrials, I want to remember this. And they're told you're not going to. You're going to forget, but you will remember at some point in time.
That's correct.
So I think at some point, whatever the catalyst is, you will remember. Now, we got a minute and a half left, so I'm going to ask one question and then ask you to give whatever statement or any closing statement you want to all the listeners. You, in your book, it's just so phenomenal. Like I said, we definitely have to do this again. There are a series of photographs that were taken, 7 pictures by an Italian engineer whose last name is Monguzzi, where it shows this basically an otherworldly astronaut exiting his ship and kind of walking around it, and you enlarged these photographs. Can you tell us briefly about that before you?
This was in July in 1952 on the Scherchen Glacier, which is the Italian side of the area in particular in Switzerland, and the 7 photographs were taken of a craft which actually landed, and there are photographs of the occupant and photographs of the actual craft, which can be seen very, very distinctly. And they were taken by Giampiero Monguzzi, who's an Italian engineer, in the presence of his wife during a climbing trip on the Scherchen Glacier. And that couple, Monguzzi and his wife, were partially paralyzed during the encounter, but Monguzzi managed to take some clear pictures as Monguzzi and his wife, lay close to the ground. And there are photographs, 2 photographs showing the astronaut walking around the craft as if inspecting it. So, I mean, I think that's absolutely genuine, and there is a letter which I've reproduced in my book. I can't find it to hand, saying that it was taken very, very seriously by the Swiss authorities. They did not ridicule the event at all. They said there was a lot of evidence and so forth.
Go ahead, Johnny.
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, good evening, and it's an honour again to meet you. But yeah, I followed you for many years myself. I think one of the early videos I saw of you looking very fresh and young was
It's been a long time ago.
No, you still look fresh and young. It's the musician in you that keeps you young.
Well, talking of that, before I ask my question, have you ever been in any pop videos playing your violin? Because I'm pretty sure I've seen you in some of the 80s videos.
Yes.
You were?
Yes, there are a few. Yeah, there are a few. Yeah, doing sessions in the 1970s and 1980s and early 1990s, and I appeared on quite a few video things. So
it was either a Rick Astley one or something like that. It was quite popular, but they showed that obviously the orchestra in the background, and there was what I believed was you.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I do tell people that, and they say, no, it can't be him. And I'm saying, no, I think he does say...
There are a few, yeah.
Go ahead, Johnny. I know he's...
My last question, Tim, was what's the most popular question that you get from, the investigators themselves? What do they ask you? What do they feel you can give to the puzzle? Is there a certain area that people ask you?
I think, have you had encounters with actual aliens? Have you had encounters with craft? And
I've seen craft myself, yeah. I've seen orbs, I've seen what they call Ibanis, all of these orbs.
Barneys?
Ibani, yeah. And it's basically like hundreds of orbs joining together in sets of 4 and then, stacking up. So you get this sort of what they call in English a space serpent. But it looks like lots and lots of orbs all joining together, and that's what I saw. A place called Badger's Mount, just off in Kent, just near where I live.
It's near Sevenoaks, isn't it?
In Sevenoaks, yeah, that's right. Well, I found out that where I'd seen these, I'd gone back with a friend a couple of days later and found out that there was a DTLS training base or some base on this Badger's Mount that deals with all of the remote controlling of drones, all of the electronics.
I've heard that from another source, yeah.
Communications. So it was quite ironic that these drones were these orbs in this case were hovering right over this base. And as I say, I was driving on a side road for some obscure reason. We ended up coming off the M25 and coming along this side road that brought me up to Badger's Mount, and it took me straight past this base on a hill. And that's where we noticed all these orbs initially. I said to my mate, look at them orbs on the left. He said, they're not orbs, that's a constellation. I said, it's not. Look, you can see the stars behind. Yeah. And anyway, he was having nothing to do with it, and I realised, there's some people that you just can't tell. And I just ignored it all, and for some reason I just forgot all about it. But I carried on driving, and lo and behold, not a minute later, is like this pillar of orbs, and it's going up about 400 feet in the air. And I just drove up very, very slowly next to it, and I couldn't stop. My co-person was saying, don't stop, you've got your children in the car, anything can hit us, any excuse not to stop. But I slowed down enough to see it, that the base of it was about 30 foot from the ground, and all these orbs that were hovering in the field, that would come along from a constellation were sort of coming in over the field, and then individually with their own intelligence were all going to the bottom of this pillar, and it would rise up after 4 joined, and just enough for the next lot to come in. And as I say, I looked up and it was about 400 feet up, and I was just bewildered by it. I didn't feel threatened or fear.
I wish I'd had an experience like that, Johnny.
Mr. Good, it is truly a fantastic case, as is your entire book, Earth, Alien Enterprise. It's always an honor to speak with you, and sorry, our time is up, everybody, and we will bring back Mr. Good again in the future. He is, like I said, one of my favorite ufologists, and as we end this show, again, this is Dr. J signing out. Follow me at Researcher on a Mission, or at Dr. JANDY Live.